In the sun-baked cradle of ancient Egypt, where the Nile flowed with both life and destiny, a kingdom trembled. A legendary warrior lay dying, and only a woman, a physician whose very existence defied tradition, held the key to his survival. Summoned to the Pharaoh's opulent palace, Iset knew her skills would be tested. But beneath the glittering surface, a deeper malady festered, the venom of envy, the chill of conspiracy, and the dangerous currents of forbidden power. Will her courage be enough to heal a broken hero, or will the ancient world consume them both? Tell us, from where do you embark on this epic journey, and what is it about the grand romances of history that captures your heart? Have you ever loved someone you couldn't have? The golden light of dawn crept through the narrow windows of Iset's medical chamber, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with ceramic jars containing the secrets of life and death. In the heart of Thebes, capital of the mighty Egyptian Empire during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, the year 1350 before the birth of Christ, the young physician worked by flickering candlelight, her delicate hands grinding precious herbs with the same precision her ancestors had used to build the pyramids. The mortar and pestle sang their ancient rhythm as Iset crushed dried lotus petals with frankincense, the aromatic dust rising like incense to the gods. Her amber eyes, rimmed with the traditional kohl that protected against both sun and evil spirits, remained focused on her work even as exhaustion weighed upon her shoulders like a pharaoh's golden collar. She had spent the night tending to a merchant's wife, whose difficult labor had nearly claimed both mother and child, and dawn brought no promise of rest. The sound of sandaled feet running across stone interrupted the morning's tranquility. Iset's servant girl, Myret, burst through the chamber doors, her chest heaving and eyes wide with urgency. "My lady," Myret gasped, falling to her knees in the traditional gesture of respect. "A royal messenger awaits. The Pharaoh himself commands your immediate presence at the palace." Iset's hands stilled on the mortar. In her 28 years, she had been summoned to treat members of the royal household before, but never with such urgency, never at dawn's first light. She set aside her work and rose, her white linen dress rustling like papyrus in the morning breeze. "What malady requires the Pharaoh's physician at such an hour?" she asked, though her heart already knew the answer would change everything. "General Horemheb has returned from the Nubian campaigns, my lady. They say he burns with fever, and that his wound festers beyond the skill of the palace physicians. You are his last hope." The name struck Iset like a physical blow. Horemheb, the legendary warrior whose victories had expanded Egypt's borders and filled the royal treasury with Nubian gold. Every citizen of Thebes knew his name, spoke it with reverence and awe. Yet Iset knew him only by reputation, a man as distant from her world as the stars were from the earth. "Prepare my medical bag," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Include the strongest wine for cleansing, honey from the sacred bees, and the silver instruments. If the palace physicians have failed, the general's condition must be grave indeed." As Myret hurried to obey, Iset moved to her polished bronze mirror, checking her appearance with the practiced eye of a woman who had learned to command respect in a world that questioned her very right to exist. Her reflection showed a face that had matured beyond its years, marked by the weight of responsibility and the constant battle to prove her worth. She adjusted the golden ankh pendant at her throat, a symbol of life that had become her talisman, her silent declaration that she served the forces of healing and hope. Before departing for the palace, duty compelled her to visit the one person whose wisdom had shaped her into the physician she had become. Khemwaset's modest house lay in the shadow of the great temple of Karnak, where the morning prayers to Amun-Ra echoed across the sacred lake, like the heartbeat of Egypt itself. She found her mentor in his garden, tending to the medicinal plants that had been his life's work. At 60 years, Khemwaset remained sharp as a scribe's reed, though his once powerful frame had bent beneath the weight of accumulated knowledge and secret sorrows. "Master," Iset called softly, using the title that honored both his wisdom and their bond. "I have been summoned to treat General Horemheb." Thutmose's weathered hands paused in their work among the healing herbs. When he turned to face her, his eyes held a gravity that sent ice through her veins. "The winds of change blow through the palace, my child," he said, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "Prince Thutmose has been meeting with foreign traders in secret, men whose loyalty lies not with Egypt but with gold. I fear the general's return comes at a dangerous time. What are you saying?" Iset stepped closer, her heart beginning to race with an unnamed dread. "I am saying that in times of political upheaval, even healers can become pawns in games they do not understand." His gnarled hand reached out to touch her cheek with fatherly tenderness. "Be careful, Iset. Your skill has made you valuable, but value can become vulnerability in the wrong hands." The warning settled over her like a burial shroud, heavy with implications she could not yet comprehend. "Master, you speak in riddles that frighten me. Then let me speak plainly." Thutmose's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to carry the secrets of the gods themselves. "Trust no one at the palace completely. Not the physicians who resent your success, not the nobles who smile while plotting your downfall, and especially not Prince Thutmose, whose ambition burns hotter than the desert sun." Iset felt the ground shift beneath her feet, as if the very foundations of her world had begun to crack. "And the general? Horemheb is a man of honor, but honor can be both shield and sword. Judge him by his actions, not his reputation." Thutmose pressed a small amulet into her palm, a piece of turquoise carved with protective hieroglyphs. "May Isis guide your hands and Thoth grant you wisdom." As Iset made her way through the bustling streets of Thebes toward the palace, the amulet seemed to burn against her palm like a coal from the sacred fires. The city awakened around her in a symphony of daily life, merchants calling their wares, children playing in the dust, priests chanting their morning prayers. Yet beneath the familiar rhythms, she sensed an undercurrent of tension, as if the very air crackled with unspoken fears. The palace of Pharaoh Amenhotep III rose before her like a mountain of golden stone, its massive columns reaching toward the heavens in eternal supplication to the gods. Guards in bronze armor and pleated kilts stood at attention as she approached, their spears glinting in the strengthening sunlight. The royal messenger, a thin man with the nervous energy of a desert hare, led her through corridors adorned with paintings that told the story of Egypt's glory, pharaohs receiving tribute from conquered lands, gods blessing the royal lineage, the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that governed all existence. The general's chamber lay in the palace's eastern wing, where the morning light could aid in healing. But as Iset approached, the sounds that greeted her spoke not of recovery, but of desperate struggle. Male voices argued in heated whispers, punctuated by groans of pain that seemed to tear the very air. She paused at the threshold, her trained ear cataloguing the symptoms before her eyes confirmed them. Fever, delirium, the telltale signs of infection that had progressed beyond the early stages. Through the partially open door, she glimpsed the scene within. 3 palace physicians huddled in consultation, their faces grave with the knowledge of their own failure. And on the bed, a figure that commanded attention even in the grip of illness. General Horemheb lay propped against silk cushions, his powerful frame reduced by fever but still radiating the authority of a man accustomed to command. His skin, bronzed by years under the desert sun, now bore the pallor of sickness, and sweat beaded on his brow like morning dew on temple stones. Even unconscious, his face held the sharp angles of intelligence and determination, the features of a man who had risen from common birth to stand at the right hand of pharaohs. "The wound grows worse by the hour," one physician muttered to his colleagues. "The flesh blackens, and the fever consumes him like fire consumes papyrus." "We have tried everything," another replied, his voice heavy with defeat. "The gods have turned their faces from our efforts." Iset stepped into the chamber, her presence immediately commanding attention. The three physicians turned toward her with expressions that ranged from relief to barely concealed resentment. She had grown accustomed to such looks, the way men's faces revealed their struggle between desperate need and wounded pride. "You are the woman physician," the eldest said, his tone carefully neutral. "We have exhausted our knowledge. Perhaps your methods might succeed where ours have failed." The careful pause before the word methods spoke volumes about their opinion of her unconventional training and techniques. Iset had learned to armor herself against such subtle insults, but they still stung like thorns against bare skin. "I am Iset, first physician to the royal household," she replied with quiet dignity, "and I am here because Pharaoh Amenhotep commands it, not because your methods have failed." She moved to the bedside with the fluid grace of a dancer, her trained eyes taking in every detail of the general's condition. The wound on his left thigh, partially hidden beneath linen bandages, emanated the sweet, sickly smell of corruption. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and his skin burned with the heat of internal fire. As if sensing her presence, Horemheb's eyes fluttered open. For a moment they were unfocused, lost in the haze of fever. Then awareness returned, sharp and immediate as a sword thrust. His gaze fixed on her face, and she saw the exact moment when understanding dawned. "No," the word emerged as a growl from his parched throat. "I will not be treated by someone I do not trust with my life. What proof do I have of your competence?" The challenge hung in the air between them, like an unsheathed blade. Iset felt the eyes of the palace physicians upon her, waiting to see how she would respond to this public questioning of her abilities. In that moment, she understood that this was about more than medicine. This was about power, respect, and the eternal struggle between tradition and progress. She leaned closer to the bed, close enough to see the flecks of green in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his fevered skin. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had faced death and emerged victorious. "Then die, General, but do so quietly. Your moaning disturbs my concentration on patients who actually want to live." The silence that followed her words seemed to stretch for eternity. Then, incredibly, something that might have been admiration flickered in Horemheb's eyes before the fever claimed him again, pulling him back into unconsciousness. "Guards!" Iset called without taking her eyes from the general's face. "Hold him steady. I have work to do." Despite the unconscious man's earlier protests, Pharaoh's will superseded all other considerations. Two palace guards moved to either side of the bed, their strong hands ready to restrain the patient should he awaken during the procedure. Iset opened her medical bag with the reverence of a priestess preparing for sacred ritual. Each instrument had been crafted by master artisans, their silver surfaces polished to mirror brightness. She selected a thin blade, its edge honed to surgical sharpness, and held it up to catch the morning light. "What I'm about to do," she announced to the watching physicians, "requires precision and knowledge of the body's hidden pathways. The infection has created a pocket of corruption that must be drained, or it will spread to his heart and kill him." With steady hands, she began to unwrap the bandages that covered Horemheb's wound. Layer by layer, the extent of the damage revealed itself. The original injury, likely from a Nubian spear, had been poorly cleaned and hastily stitched. Now the flesh around it had turned an ominous shade of red-black, and yellow pus seeped from the edges like poison from a serpent's fang. "Wine," she commanded, and one of the physicians hurried to comply. Not the watered wine of common use, but the strongest available, and honey the purest you can find. As her assistants gathered the required materials, Iset placed her hands on either side of the wound, feeling for the telltale signs of deep infection. Her fingers, trained through years of study and practice, could read the body's secrets like a scribe reading hieroglyphs. "The corruption runs deep," she murmured, more to herself than to the watching men. "But it has not yet reached the bone. There is hope." She made the first incision with the confidence of a master craftsman, her blade following the natural lines of muscle and sinew. Horemheb's body tensed, even in unconsciousness, and a low groan escaped his lips. The guards tightened their grip, holding him steady as Iset worked. Blood and pus flowed from the opened wound, carrying with it the poisons that had been slowly killing the general. Iset worked with methodical precision, cleaning away the corrupted flesh and irrigating the wound with wine that hissed and bubbled as it met the infection. "How do you know to cut there?" one of the younger physicians asked, his earlier resentment replaced by genuine curiosity. "The body speaks to those who know how to listen," Iset replied, without pausing in her work. "Feel here, where the flesh is hot and swollen. The infection follows predictable paths, like water flowing downhill. Cut against its flow, and you can stop its progress." For the next hour, she worked in concentrated silence, her world narrowed to the small battlefield of flesh and blood beneath her hands. She removed fragments of dirty cloth that had been driven into the wound, cleaned away dead tissue, and carefully sutured torn muscles back together. Finally, she began the delicate process of closing the wound, her stitches small and precise as a master weaver's knots. Over the cleaned flesh, she spread a mixture of honey and ground herbs, substances that would fight infection and promote healing. "It is done," she announced, stepping back from the bed. Her white dress bore stains of blood and medicine, badges of honor, in her private war against death and disease. Horemheb's breathing had already grown deeper and more regular, his body's natural healing processes freed from the burden of fighting corruption. The fever that had burned in his skin began to subside, though Iset knew it would be hours before he fully awakened. "Will he live?" asked the eldest physician, his voice holding a note of something that might have been respect. "If the gods will it, and if he follows my instructions for recovery," Iset replied. "The next 3 days will tell the tale." Over those 3 days, she returned to the palace each morning and evening, monitoring Horemheb's progress and adjusting his treatment as needed. Gradually, the general's strength returned, and with it, his consciousness. Their interactions during this period crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the growing awareness between a man and woman who were natural adversaries forced into intimate proximity. "You question my methods," Iset observed on the second day as she changed his bandages with gentle efficiency. "Yet you cannot argue with the results." Horemheb, now alert enough to engage in conversation, studied her face with the intensity of a military strategist, analyzing enemy positions. "I question everything that challenges what I thought I knew about the world. You, physician, are a walking challenge to every assumption I have ever held about women's capabilities." "And what assumptions were those?" she asked, her fingers working to secure the fresh bandages around his thigh. The touch was purely medical, yet both were acutely aware of the warmth of skin against skin, the intimacy of healer and patient. That women are gentle creatures, suited for bearing children and managing households, that they lack the stomach for blood and the mind for complex reasoning. His voice held a note of self-mockery. "You have proven me spectacularly wrong on all counts. Perhaps the fault lies not in women's nature, but in men's limited imagination," Iset replied, her tone light, but her words carrying the weight of years spent fighting for recognition and respect. Their verbal sparring continued throughout his recovery, each conversation revealing new layers of personality and conviction. Horemheb spoke of his campaigns in Nubia, of the weight of command and the burden of sending young men to die for Egypt's glory. Iset shared her passion for healing, her frustration with those who valued tradition over progress, her dream of a world where knowledge mattered more than gender. Neither acknowledged the growing attraction that simmered beneath their debates, the way their eyes lingered on each other's faces, the electric charge that passed between them when their hands accidentally touched. Both were too proud, too aware of the vast social gulf that separated them, to admit to such dangerous feelings. On the morning of the fourth day, as Iset prepared to make what she hoped would be her final medical visit to the general, a commotion in the palace corridors caught her attention. Servants whispered in urgent clusters, their faces pale with fear and excitement. "What news spreads through the palace like wildfire?" she asked Meret, who had accompanied her that morning. "They say a strange sickness has appeared among the pyramid workers, my lady. Men fall ill with fever and strange marks upon their skin, and many die within 3 days. The palace physicians are baffled, and fear grows that it might spread to the city." Iset felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. A new disease, unknown and deadly, represented the kind of challenge that could make or break a physician's reputation. It also represented an opportunity to prove her worth on a scale larger than any single patient. When she entered Horemheb's chamber, she found him sitting up in bed, his color restored and his eyes bright with returning health. The sight of his recovery filled her with professional satisfaction and something deeper, warmer, that she dared not examine too closely. "You look well, General," she said, setting down her medical bag and moving to examine his wound one final time. "The healing progresses better than I had hoped." "Thanks to your skill," he replied, his voice carrying a sincerity that made her heart skip like a stone across water. "I owe you my life, physician. That is a debt I do not take lightly." Before she could respond, the chamber doors burst open to admit Pharaoh Amenhotep himself, accompanied by his personal guard and several high-ranking officials. Iset immediately dropped to her knees in the traditional gesture of submission, her forehead touching the cool stone floor. "Arise, physician," the pharaoh commanded, his voice carrying the authority of divine kingship. "We have urgent need of your services." As Iset stood, she found herself face to face with the living god of Egypt. Amenhotep III was a man in his middle years, his body still strong despite the soft living of royalty. His eyes, rimmed with kohl and shadowed by the weight of absolute power, held intelligence and a weariness that spoke of the burden of ruling an empire. "My pharaoh," she said, bowing her head respectfully, "I am at your service." "A plague has appeared among our workers," Amenhotep announced, his words falling like stones into still water. "Our physicians are powerless against it. We command you to find its source and its cure." "And I," Horemheb interjected, swinging his legs over the side of the bed, despite Iset's sharp look of medical disapproval, "will investigate whether this plague is natural or the work of enemies who would weaken Egypt through disease." "You are not yet fully recovered," Iset protested, her physician's instincts overriding court protocol. "To undertake such strenuous activity could reopen your wound." "The wound is healed enough," Horemheb replied, standing with only a slight favoring of his injured leg. "And Egypt's security cannot wait for my complete recovery." Pharaoh Amenhotep looked between them, his expression thoughtful. "Then you will work together. The physician will seek medical answers. The general will seek military ones. Between you, we will have the truth." The command hung in the air like incense, binding them together in a partnership neither had sought, but both were honor-bound to accept. Iset felt the weight of royal expectation settle upon her shoulders like a pharaoh's collar, heavy with responsibility and bright with opportunity. "It shall be as you command, my pharaoh," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. As the royal party departed, leaving Iset and Horemheb alone in the chamber, the silence stretched between them like a bridge over dangerous waters. Both understood that their lives had just become irrevocably intertwined, bound together by duty and circumstance in ways that neither could yet fully comprehend. "It seems, physician, that fate has made us partners," Horemheb said, his voice carrying a mixture of resignation and something that might have been anticipation. "So it seems, General," Iset replied, her amber eyes meeting his brown ones with an intensity that spoke of challenges yet to come. "I pray we are equal to the task." The sun had reached its zenith by the time they made their way through the streets of Thebes toward the workers' quarter where the plague had first appeared. The city that had seemed so familiar to Iset that morning now felt different, charged with an undercurrent of fear and uncertainty. Merchants closed their stalls early, mothers pulled their children close, and the very air seemed to whisper of dangers unseen. The workers' quarter lay in the shadow of the Great Pyramids, where generations of laborers had lived and died in service to Pharaoh's dreams of immortality. Here, the streets were narrow and dusty, the houses simple structures of mud brick and palm fronds. It was a world apart from the golden splendor of the palace, yet it was here that Egypt's greatest monuments were born. The stench hit them first, a sweet, sickly smell that spoke of death and decay. Iset had encountered it before in her medical practice, but never on such a scale. Entire households had been affected, their members lying in various stages of illness or death. "How many?" Horemheb asked the foreman who met them at the quarter's entrance, his military mind immediately seeking to quantify the scope of the crisis. "Near 200 fallen ill, General," the man replied, his weathered face creased with worry. "And of those, perhaps 60 have died. The sickness comes swift as a desert storm and burns through a man like fire through dry grass." Iset knelt beside the first victim they encountered, a young man whose skin bore the telltale marks of the disease, angry red welts that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent life. His breathing was shallow and labored, his body burning with fever, despite the cool cloths his wife had placed upon his brow. "How long has he been ill?" she asked the woman, her voice gentle with compassion. 3 days, my lady," the wife replied, tears streaming down her dust-stained cheeks. "He was strong as a bull when it began, but now—" She gestured helplessly at her husband's wasted form. Iset examined several more victims, her trained eye cataloguing symptoms and searching for patterns. The disease seemed to follow a predictable course. Sudden onset of fever, followed by the appearance of skin lesions, then rapid deterioration leading to death within 3 days. Yet she noticed something that gave her hope. "General," she called to Horemheb, who was questioning witnesses about the plague's first appearance, "I need you to see this." He approached, his soldiers bearing unchanged despite his recent injury. "What have you discovered?" "Look here," she said, indicating a woman who lay on a reed mat in the shade of her home. "This patient has been ill for 4 days, yet she still lives. And here, a child who shows signs of recovery after 5 days of sickness." Horemheb's eyes sharpened with the focus of a military strategist, recognizing a crucial piece of intelligence. "You believe some survive? I believe the disease can be fought if caught early enough and treated properly," Iset replied, her voice carrying the excitement of discovery. "The key is understanding what makes the difference between death and recovery." As they worked together through the afternoon, examining patients and interviewing survivors, a strange alchemy began to occur between them. Horemheb's methodical military approach complemented Iset's medical intuition, while her compassion for the suffering softened his sometimes harsh pragmatism. They moved through the plague-stricken quarter like dancers learning a complex routine, each anticipating the other's needs and responses. "The pattern suggests a source," Horemheb observed as they paused to rest in the shade of a date palm. The first cases appeared among workers assigned to the new granary project. From there, it spread to their families and neighbors. "A source, yes," Iset agreed, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. "But what kind of source? Contaminated water, spoiled food, some miasma in the air itself?" Their eyes met across the small space between them, and for a moment the professional partnership gave way to something more personal and infinitely more dangerous. The afternoon heat seemed to intensify, wrapping around them like silk scarves, and Iset became acutely aware of the way Horemheb's gaze lingered on her face, the way her own pulse quickened in response. "We should return to the palace," she said quickly, breaking the spell before it could fully form. I need to consult my medical texts, and you should report our findings to Pharaoh." "Yes," Horemheb agreed, though his voice carried a note of reluctance. "We should." As they made their way back through the city streets, now painted gold by the setting sun, neither spoke of the moment that had passed between them. Yet both carried its memory like a secret flame, warming them against the growing shadows of evening and the challenges that lay ahead. The palace corridors buzzed with activity as news of their investigations spread through the royal household. Servants whispered in corners, officials huddled in urgent consultation, and the very air seemed charged with anticipation and fear. It was as they approached the main courtyard that Myret came running toward them, her face pale with terror, and her breath coming in gasps that spoke of desperate urgency. "My lady," she cried, falling to her knees before Iset. "Terrible news! Master Khaemweset has been arrested by Prince Thutmose's guards. They say he is charged with sedition against the crown." The words struck Iset like physical blows, each one driving the breath from her lungs and the strength from her limbs. Khaemweset, her mentor, her guide, the man who had taught her everything she knew about the healing arts, arrested for treason. It was impossible, unthinkable, yet the terror in Myret's eyes spoke of undeniable truth. "When?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her own heart. "This afternoon, my lady, while you were in the workers' quarter. They came with chains and accusations, saying he had been meeting with enemies of Egypt and plotting against Pharaoh's rule." Horemheb stepped closer, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of Iset's emotions. "This makes no sense," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Khaemweset is known throughout Thebes for his loyalty and wisdom. What evidence could they possibly have? They say they found letters in his house, correspondence with Nubian agents," Myret replied, her words tumbling over each other in her haste to deliver the terrible news. "Prince Thutmose himself led the arrest, claiming that the old physician was part of a conspiracy to weaken Egypt through poison and disease. The implications hit Iset like an avalanche of stone blocks. If Khaemweset could be accused of treason, if his loyalty could be questioned, then no one was safe. And if the plague was indeed connected to some larger conspiracy, as Thutmose seemed to suggest, then her own investigation might have just become infinitely more dangerous. She looked up at Horemheb, seeing her own fears reflected in his eyes. In the space of a single day, they had been bound together by royal command to solve a medical mystery. Now they found themselves standing at the edge of a political abyss that threatened to swallow them both. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Horemheb's hand moved as if to touch her shoulder in comfort, then stopped, hovering in the space between them like a promise unfulfilled. "We do what Pharaoh commanded," he said, his voice carrying the steel of military resolve. "We find the truth, whatever the cost." And as the last light of day faded from the sky above Thebes, Iset and Horemheb stood together in the palace courtyard, surrounded by shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets and betrayals yet to come. The plague that had brought them together was only the beginning, a single thread in a tapestry of conspiracy that threatened to unravel the very foundations of the kingdom they both served. Neither could know that their partnership, forged in the crucible of crisis and tempered by growing attraction, would soon be tested by forces that sought to destroy not only their professional reputations, but their very lives. The game of power had begun, and they were no longer merely physician and general, but players in a deadly contest where love and loyalty would be the ultimate stakes. In the distance, the great pyramids stood silent against the star-filled sky, eternal monuments to pharaohs who had believed themselves immortal. Yet even gods could fall, and in the shadows of their tombs, new legends were about to be born. The morning sun cast long shadows across the workers' quarter as Iset and Horemheb returned to continue their investigation into the mysterious plague that had already claimed so many lives. The air hung heavy with the scent of burning incense from nearby temples, mingling with the less pleasant odors of sickness and desperation that permeated the narrow streets. 3 days had passed since Kamwaset's arrest, and the weight of her mentor's imprisonment pressed upon Iset's heart like a stone upon a tomb. "We must approach this systematically," Horemheb said as they walked side by side through the dusty pathways between mud brick houses. His military bearing remained unchanged despite his recent injury, though Iset noticed the slight favor he still gave to his left leg. "Every disease has a source, just as every battle has a beginning." Iset adjusted the leather satchel containing her medical supplies, her fingers unconsciously seeking the reassuring weight of the instruments within. "In medicine, we learn that symptoms tell a story, General. We must listen to what the bodies of the afflicted are trying to tell us." Indeed, their different approaches to the crisis had become apparent over the past few days of working together. Where Horemheb sought immediate action and concrete answers, Iset preferred careful observation and methodical analysis. Yet somehow their contrasting methods complemented each other like the two halves of a broken pottery shard, fitting together to create something stronger than either could achieve alone. They entered the home of Horemheb, a master stonecutter whose entire family had fallen victim to the plague. The man himself lay on a reed mat, his powerful frame reduced to skin and bone by the ravages of the disease. His wife, Taweret, knelt beside him with the hollow-eyed expression of someone who had already begun mourning the living. "How long since the fever began?" Iset asked gently, kneeling beside the woman and placing a comforting hand upon her shoulder. 4 days, my lady," Taweret whispered, her voice barely audible above the labored breathing of her husband. "But yesterday the fever broke for a time, and he spoke my name. Is there hope?" Iset examined the patient carefully, her trained fingers checking his pulse and the temperature of his skin. Unlike the victims she had seen in the advanced stages of the disease, Horemheb's breathing had begun to steady, and the angry red welts on his skin showed signs of healing rather than spreading. "There is always hope," she replied, reaching into her satchel for a small ceramic jar. "I want you to mix this honey with wine and give him small sips throughout the day. The honey will fight the corruption in his blood, while the wine will strengthen his heart." As she prepared the mixture, combining the golden honey with strong red wine and a carefully measured portion of ground willow bark, Horemheb questioned Taweret about her husband's work and recent activities. "He was assigned to the new granary project near the river," the woman explained. "Many of the workers there have fallen ill. They say the grain itself is cursed by Set, the god of chaos." Horemheb and Iset exchanged meaningful glances. This was the third family to mention the granary project, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. "What can you tell us about this grain?" Horemheb pressed, his voice gentle but insistent. "Did your husband mention anything unusual about it?" "He said it smelled wrong," Taweret replied, her brow furrowing with the effort of memory. "Not like grain should smell, but sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. The overseer told the workers it was just the dampness from the river, but Horemheb said it made his stomach turn." Iset felt a thrill of discovery course through her veins like liquid fire. "Taweret, this information may save many lives. Continue with the honey and wine mixture and send word to the palace if his condition changes." As they left the stonecutter's house, Horemheb caught Iset's arm, his touch sending an unexpected jolt of awareness through her entire body. "You have an idea about the grain?" "More than an idea," she replied, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at his proximity. "In my studies with Kamwaset, I learned about grain that spoils in certain ways. When stored in damp conditions, it can develop a corruption that poisons those who consume it. The symptoms match what we have observed. Then we must examine this grain immediately." Horemheb declared, his military instincts taking command. If it is indeed the source of the plague, we can stop its spread. They made their way toward the granary complex near the Nile's edge, where massive stone buildings housed the grain that fed Thebes. The structures rose like monuments to Egypt's prosperity, their walls decorated with hieroglyphs depicting the goddess Renenutet, protector of the harvest. Inside the newest granary, they found confirmation of their suspicions. The grain stored there bore the telltale signs of contamination, discolored kernels with a sickly sweet odor that made Iset's stomach clench with revulsion. But more disturbing still was the realization that this grain had come from Nubia, carried by the same trade routes that Horemheb had helped secure during his recent military campaigns. "This is no accident," Horemheb said grimly, his soldier's mind immediately grasping the implications. "Someone has deliberately introduced contaminated grain into our food supply." "But who would do such a thing?" Iset asked, though even as the words left her lips, she began to suspect the answer. Their investigation was interrupted by the arrival of a young boy, no more than 10 years old, who stumbled into the granary with the unmistakable symptoms of the plague already manifesting on his small frame. His skin burned with fever, and the characteristic red welts had begun to appear on his arms and face. "Help me," the child gasped before collapsing onto the stone floor. Without hesitation, Iset dropped to her knees beside the boy, while Horemheb moved to support the child's head and shoulders. This was their chance to test her theory about early treatment, to prove that the disease could be fought if caught in its initial stages. "Hold him steady," she instructed, her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "I need to get the medicine into him before the fever takes complete hold." Working with practiced efficiency, she prepared a concentrated mixture of honey, wine, and healing herbs, her hands steady, despite the knowledge that a child's life hung in the balance. Horemheb's strong arms cradled the boy with surprising gentleness, his calloused warrior's hands transformed into instruments of comfort and protection. "Drink, little one," Iset whispered, holding the cup to the child's lips. "This will help fight the sickness inside you." For agonizing minutes, they worked together in perfect synchronization, Horemheb supporting the boy, while Iset administered her treatment and monitored his vital signs. Gradually, miraculously, the child's breathing began to ease, and the terrible heat of fever started to subside. "It is working," Horemheb breathed, wonder evident in his voice. In that moment of triumph, as they both leaned over the recovering child, their hands met on the boy's forehead. The touch was electric, sending shockwaves of awareness through both of them that had nothing to do with medicine, and everything to do with the growing attraction that neither could deny. Their eyes met across the small space that separated them, and Iset saw her own desire reflected in Horemheb's dark gaze. Time seemed suspended, the world narrowing to encompass only the two of them and the dangerous feelings that crackled between them like lightning before a storm. Both pulled away simultaneously, shaken by the intensity of their connection. The child stirred in Horemheb's arms, his fever broken and his breathing steady. But the real miracle was the unspoken understanding that had passed between his rescuers. "We should return him to his family," Iset said, her voice slightly unsteady as she struggled to regain her professional composure. "Yes," Horemheb agreed, though his eyes continued to search her face with an intensity that made her heart race. "They will want to know he is safe." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of medical consultations and investigative work, but beneath the surface of their professional partnership, a new current of awareness flowed like an underground river. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every moment of proximity served to heighten the tension that neither dared acknowledge openly. As evening approached, they were summoned to attend a feast at the palace in honor of visiting dignitaries from Memphis. Iset had hoped to spend the evening reviewing her medical texts and preparing new treatments for the plague victims, but royal commands could not be ignored. The great hall of the palace blazed with the light of 1,000 oil lamps, their flames reflecting off golden walls decorated with scenes of pharaonic triumph. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, exotic spices, and the heavy perfumes favored by the nobility. Musicians played softly in one corner, while servants moved like shadows between the low tables where the guests reclined on silk cushions. The seating arrangement spoke volumes about the rigid hierarchy of Egyptian society. At the high table, beneath a canopy of blue silk that represented the heavens, sat Pharaoh Amenhotep and his immediate family. Prince Thutmose occupied a place of honor at his brother's right hand, his handsome face animated as he regaled the royal party with tales of his recent hunting expeditions. Horemheb, despite his military achievements and royal favor, was seated among the lesser nobility, his humble origins marking him as forever separate from those born to privilege. Iset found herself placed even further from the center of power, among the palace functionaries and minor officials, her gender and profession making her an oddity that the court tolerated but did not fully accept. From her position, she could observe the subtle dynamics of power that played out among the assembled guests. She watched as the established nobles treated Horemheb with a courtesy that barely concealed their disdain for his common birth, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes when they addressed him. "Tell me, General," Prince Thutmose called out, his voice carrying clearly across the hall, "how fares your investigation into this mysterious plague? I trust you have not allowed yourself to be distracted by the charms of your assistant." The prince's words dripped with innuendo, and several of the nobles chuckled appreciatively at what they perceived as wit. Iset felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment but from anger at the casual dismissal of her professional capabilities. Horemheb's response surprised everyone in the hall, including Iset herself. Rising from his cushion with the fluid grace of a trained warrior, he fixed Prince Thutmose with a stare that could have melted bronze. "Your Highness," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command, "I have had the privilege of working alongside the most skilled physician in all of Egypt. Her knowledge and dedication have already saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. Any man who questions her competence reveals only his own ignorance." The silence that followed his words was deafening. In defending Iset so publicly and forcefully, Horemheb had not only challenged Prince Thutmose, but had also declared his respect for her in terms that left little room for misinterpretation. The court would buzz with speculation about their relationship for days to come. Prince Thutmose's face darkened with anger, but before he could respond, Pharaoh Amenhotep raised his hand for silence. "We are pleased to hear of the progress in your investigation," the pharaoh said diplomatically. "Egypt's health depends upon your success." As the feast continued, Iset found herself the subject of curious glances and whispered conversations. Some of the looks were admiring, others skeptical, but all acknowledged that something significant had just occurred. Horemheb had publicly aligned himself with her, and in doing so had changed the dynamics of their partnership forever. Later that evening, as the guests began to disperse, Iset was approached by her friend Nefertiti, a young woman whose beauty had earned her a position as lady-in-waiting to one of the minor queens. Nefertiti's dark eyes sparkled with intelligence and mischief as she drew Iset aside into a quiet alcove. "My dear friend," Nefertiti whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of the departing feast, "you have certainly stirred the waters tonight. The entire court is talking about the general's defense of you." "It was merely professional courtesy," Iset replied, though her heart still raced at the memory of Horemheb's words. "Professional courtesy." Nefertiti laughed softly. "My sweet Iset, I have been watching the two of you all evening. The way he looks at you, the way you respond to his presence. This is no mere professional relationship." Before Iset could protest, Nefertiti's expression grew serious. "But I did not seek you out to discuss matters of the heart. I have information that may be important to your investigation." What kind of information? Iset asked, her attention immediately focused. Prince Thutmose has been meeting secretly with Nubian traders, Nefertiti revealed, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. Strange men who come and go under cover of darkness, carrying goods that are not recorded in the official trade manifests. I have seen them myself, loading and unloading cargo near the river docks. The implications of this revelation struck Iset like a physical blow. If Prince Thutmose was indeed involved in secret trade with Nubia, it could explain how contaminated grain had found its way into Egypt's food supply. Nefertiti, this could be the key to everything, Iset breathed. But you must be careful. If the prince suspects you are watching him. I know the risks, her friend replied with quiet determination. But if there is a conspiracy against Egypt, it must be exposed. I will continue to gather information, but you and the general must be cautious. There are forces at work here that are more dangerous than any plague. As Nefertiti melted back into the crowd of departing guests, Iset felt the weight of conspiracy settling around her like a burial shroud. The plague was not a natural disaster, but a weapon, and those who wielded it moved in the highest circles of power. The following days brought a frenzy of investigation as Iset and Horemheb worked to trace the contaminated grain to its source. Their inquiries led them through the labyrinthine network of traders, suppliers, and officials who controlled Egypt's food distribution. At every turn, they encountered obstacles and evasions that suggested a conspiracy far more extensive than either had initially imagined. Working late into the night in Iset's medical chamber, surrounded by scrolls detailing trade routes and samples of contaminated grain, they finally assembled the pieces of the puzzle. The evidence pointed inexorably toward a deliberate plot to weaken Egypt through biological warfare, with the contaminated grain serving as the weapon of choice. It is brilliant in its simplicity, Horemheb said grimly, as he studied a map showing the distribution of the poisoned grain. Strike at the workers who build our monuments, the soldiers who defend our borders, the people who form the foundation of our strength. But who would dare attempt such a thing? Iset asked, though she suspected they both knew the answer. Someone with access to the highest levels of government, Horemheb replied. Someone who could arrange for the grain to be accepted without proper inspection. Someone who could silence questions and eliminate obstacles. The truth hung between them like a sword suspended by a thread. Prince Thutmose, heir to the throne of Egypt, was orchestrating the destruction of his own people in pursuit of power. As they worked together in the intimate confines of her chamber, the tension that had been building between them for days finally reached its breaking point. The flickering light of oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere of intimacy that made it impossible to ignore the attraction that pulsed between them like a living thing. Iset, Horemheb said softly, his voice rough with emotion as he moved closer to where she sat examining a scroll. She looked up to find him standing directly before her, his eyes dark with desire and something deeper, more dangerous. The air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken longing, and she felt her carefully maintained professional composure begin to crumble. "We should not," she whispered, even as her body betrayed her by swaying toward him. "I know," he replied, his hand reaching out to cup her face with infinite tenderness, "but I cannot fight this anymore." When his lips met hers, it was with a passion that had been building since their first contentious encounter in the palace. The kiss was desperate and hungry, filled with all the longing they had been forced to suppress. Iset's hands tangled in his dark hair, while his calloused palms traced the delicate line of her jaw, both of them lost in the fire that consumed them. They broke apart, breathing heavily, both shaken by the intensity of their connection. In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of conspiracy and betrayal, they had found something pure and true in each other's arms. "Whatever comes," Horemheb said, his forehead resting against hers, "we face it together." "Together," Iset agreed, her voice barely more than a whisper. But even as they pledged their unity, Shadows moved in the darkness outside her chamber. Prince Thutmose's spies had been watching, waiting, gathering evidence of their own. The trap was closing around them, and their newfound love would soon become both their greatest strength and their most vulnerable weakness. In the distance, the Great Pyramids stood silent against the star-filled sky, eternal witnesses to the rise and fall of dynasties. But in a modest chamber in Thebes, two hearts had found each other amidst the chaos of conspiracy, and their love would soon be tested by forces that sought to destroy not only their happiness, but the very kingdom they had sworn to protect. The golden light of Thebes, usually a balm against the desert's harshness, now felt like a spotlight under which Iset and Horemheb were relentlessly exposed. After weeks of escalating tension and hidden surveillance, Prince Thutmose, a viper coiled in the heart of the palace, had meticulously gathered his fabricated evidence. Every stolen glance, every hushed conversation, every moment of shared purpose between the physician and the general had been twisted, corrupted, and woven into a tapestry of deceit designed to ensnare them both. Thutmose had watched them, a predator with keen, calculating eyes, noting their burgeoning connection, the subtle shifts in their gazes, the way their hands, once purely professional, now lingered for a fraction too long. He knew the potency of Iset's mind and Horemheb's strength, and he feared their alliance more than any foreign army. The prince's accusations, sharp as a shard of obsidian, ripped through the fragile peace of the royal court. He presented his damning proof to Pharaoh Amenhotep, painting Iset as a sorceress, a practitioner of dark arts who had bewitched the valiant general Horemheb, not to heal him, but to corrupt his loyalty and weaken Egypt's military might. The whispers of witchcraft, a word that carried the weight of ancient fear and cruel judgment, echoed through the hallowed halls. Thutmose produced forged letters, supposedly from Iset to Horemheb, filled with impassioned declarations that twisted their professional respect into illicit desire. He brought forth bribed witnesses, servants with eyes darting nervously, who swore they had seen Iset performing obscure rituals, concocting potions not for healing, but for casting dark spells upon the general. Each lie was delivered with a practiced sincerity that chilled Iset to her very bones, for she knew the power of such venomous whispers in the ears of the superstitious. But the most insidious weapon in Thutmose's arsenal was his threat against Iset's family. He had sent veiled warnings, subtle but unmistakable, that the lives of her beloved Meret, and even the wise Khemwaset, her mentor, would suffer if she dared to refute his accusations too vehemently. The thought of harm befalling those she held dear was a chain around her heart, binding her tongue, forcing her into a horrifying silence. She could fight for herself, face any accusation, but to risk the lives of innocents for her own vindication was a price she could not bear. Each word of Thutmose's condemnation, each false testimony, was a hammer blow against her soul. But the fear for her family was the anvil that anchored her, preventing her from crying out the truth. Horemheb, seeing the fear in her eyes, the sudden terrible stillness that replaced her usual fierce defiance, felt a cold dread begin to coil in his gut. He knew her courage, and her silence was more terrifying than any scream. The day of the public trial dawned with a heavy, oppressive heat, mirroring the tension that hung over Thebes. The grand court, usually reserved for decrees and celebrations, was transformed into a stage for the macabre theatre of justice. Pharaoh Amenhotep, his face etched with a grave concern that bordered on weariness, sat upon his throne, his judgment clouded by the insidious poison of Thutmose's accusations. Rows of assembled nobles, their faces a mix of feigned shock and barely concealed satisfaction, filled the chamber. Many had long resented Horemheb, the common-born general who had risen so high, and Iset, the audacious female physician who defied tradition. This was their moment. Iset and Horemheb were brought forth, their hands bound, their heads held high despite the crushing weight of their predicament. Horemheb's gaze, usually so commanding, now held a deep, simmering frustration, his eyes searching Iset's, pleading for an explanation for her sudden, devastating silence. Iset, her face a mask of serene composure, met his gaze with a look of desperate sorrow, a silent apology for the betrayal she was forced to endure. She saw the questions in his eyes, the confusion, and it tore at her. Thutmose, his handsome features alight with cruel triumph, took center stage. His voice, smooth as polished granite, resonated through the hall as he accused Iset of being a foreign spy, a charlatan who used her medical position to poison the workers, hinting at the very plague they had sought to cure, and to ensnare the valiant general with her dark enchantments. He presented the forged letters, the manufactured proof of her supposed rituals, the testimony of the bribed witnesses, each lie layering upon the last, until the truth was buried beneath a mountain of slander. The evidence, though fabricated, seemed overwhelming. Even Pharaoh Amenhotep, usually shrewd and discerning, wavered, his brow furrowed with doubt. How could such accusations be so meticulously detailed? Iset, finally given a moment to speak, stood before the court, her voice clear and resonant, even though every word felt like a gamble against the lives of her loved ones. She launched into a passionate defense, not of herself as a witch, but of her medical practices, of her unwavering loyalty to Egypt, of the years she had dedicated to healing the sick. She spoke of her triumphs over disease, her revolutionary methods, her dedication to the well-being of the people. Her words, imbued with a fierce honesty, moved some of the more open-minded among the nobles, but the deep-seated fear of witchcraft, a primal terror woven into the very fabric of Egyptian society, ran too deep for many to overcome. The whispers of sorceress and seducer began to spread like a contagion through the court, fueled by those who simply wished to see Horemheb, the commoner who dared to ascend, brought low. The very air crackled with a volatile mix of righteous indignation, superstitious terror, and the cold satisfaction of envy. As the court neared its verdict, a hushed anticipation filled the hall. The shadow of execution, or a fate perhaps worse, loomed over Iset. Horemheb, his heart pounding a furious rhythm against his ribs, watched her, his mind racing. He saw the terror in her eyes, the subtle tremor in her hands, and understood, with a sudden devastating clarity, that there was a hidden threat, a deeper reason for her silence. He knew she was innocent, yet the tide of false accusations was too strong. He could not stand by and watch her be condemned, her brilliance extinguished by the darkness of deceit. In that agonizing moment, faced with Iset's potential execution, Horemheb made the most devastating decision of his life. It was a choice born of desperate love and unwavering loyalty, a sacrifice so profound it would tear his world apart. With a powerful roar that silenced the clamoring court, Horemheb stepped forward. His voice, usually a thunderclap of command, now carried the heavy burden of a false truth, carefully chosen to save the woman he loved. He confessed. But not to witchcraft, not to seduction. He confessed to being the sole traitor to a grand, audacious scheme to overthrow Pharaoh Amenhotep. He claimed that Iset was an unwitting pawn in his elaborate plot, a brilliant physician whose knowledge he had exploited, whose trust he had betrayed, all for his own nefarious ambitions. He painted himself as a ruthless opportunist, a general blinded by ambition, who had merely used the beautiful, innocent Iset as a tool in his ascent to power. His confession was a masterstroke of self-destruction, a public immolation of his own honor and reputation. He provided details, small, convincing lies that supported his fabricated narrative, twisting past events into evidence of his treason. Iset, watching this horrifying spectacle unfold, felt her blood run cold. The man she loved, who had stared down death on countless battlefields, was now meticulously dismantling his own life, piece by painful piece. Her horror was absolute, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She saw the raw agony in his eyes, the flicker of a goodbye, as he sacrificed everything for her. His motivation was clear, stark, and utterly heartbreaking. Protecting innocent lives, especially hers, mattered more to him than his own name, his own legacy, his own very existence as he knew it. He was choosing her life over his honor, a choice that left her utterly devastated and bound to him by a debt she could never repay. The Pharaoh, swayed by the general's dramatic and seemingly genuine confession, decreed his fate, exiled to the harsh deserts of the south. Iset, now seen as a mere victim of Horemheb's deception, was spared execution, but her medical practice, her very identity, was stripped from her. The separation was swift and brutal. Horemheb was stripped of his rank, his gleaming armor, his ceremonial dagger. Each item removed a symbol of his fall. He was condemned to exile, sent to wander the desolate, sun-baked expanse of the desert, his name forever sullied. Iset was allowed a final, agonizing farewell. In the dimly lit confines of his prison cell, a place reeking of despair, they shared stolen moments that felt like an eternity and a fleeting breath all at once. Their eyes, glistening with unshed tears, spoke volumes of their eternal love, a bond forged in the fires of crisis and now tested by the cruel hand of fate. They knew with a crushing certainty that this might be their last encounter, their last touch. As the guards prepared to escort him, Horemheb pressed his heavy, ornate signet ring, a symbol of his power and his unbreakable promise, into Iset's trembling palm. "I will return," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "For you, for Egypt." She could only nod, her throat tight with a silent sob, clutching the cold metal, a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. Outside, several of Horemheb's most loyal soldiers, men whose lives he had saved, men who knew his true character, watched with grim determination. They exchanged knowing glances, a silent vow passing between them. They would protect Iset, guard her, and ensure his path home was kept clear. Forbidden from official practice, ostracized by the very elite she had served, Iset refused to be broken. Her spirit, though wounded, burned with an unyielding fire. She continued her healing, but now in the shadows, tending to the poor and forgotten in the hidden alleys of Thebes, her skills a whispered legend among the desperate. Her medical chamber, once a beacon of official healing, became a clandestine sanctuary where she risked everything to ease suffering. She toiled tirelessly, driven by her innate compassion and a desperate need to find a true remedy for the plague that still plagued the city. Through countless hours of observation and experimentation, she discovered the plague's true vulnerability. Isolating patients from the sources of contaminated grain stopped its relentless spread. Her early treatment protocol, based on honey, herbs, and meticulous hygiene, began to save lives one by one, a quiet victory against the public despair. Meanwhile, the hidden network of resistance, nascent but growing, began to take shape. Nefertiti, Iset's insightful friend, moved through the palace's opulent halls like a shadow, her ears attuned to whispers, her eyes observing the prince's every move. She meticulously gathered fragments of evidence, piecing together the true scope of Thutmose's conspiracy. Horemheb's loyal soldiers, discreet and dedicated, used their military training to track movements, intercept messages, and confirm the prince's treacherous dealings with foreign powers. Their clandestine operations were the unseen threads weaving a counter-narrative, a tapestry of truth that would one day unravel Thutmose's web of lies. The consequences of Amenhotep's grave error soon became horrifyingly clear. With Horemheb, the great general, exiled, Egypt's southern defenses, once impregnable, began to crumble. Nubian armies, long held at bay by Horemheb's tactical brilliance, now surged across the borders, their movements coordinated with chilling precision, a clear sign of Thutmose's insidious conspiracy. They attacked the border fortresses, turning them into scenes of bloody chaos. As the invasion intensified, the plague, unchecked by Iset's public efforts, spread faster and more virulently through Thebes, ravaging the population, leaving death and despair in its wake. Pharaoh Amenhotep, witnessing the rapid decline of his empire, the mounting casualties from both war and disease, began to realize the terrible truth too late. He had exiled his best general and banned his most skilled physician. The weight of his misjudgment pressed down upon him, heavy as a stone monument. In an act of desperate loyalty and hope, Horemheb's devoted soldiers, operating entirely in secret, managed to send word to him in the unforgiving desert, detailing the invasion, the plague, and Egypt's desperate need. As Nubian forces approached the very gates of Thebes, their war cries echoing ominously across the desert plains, and the plague ravaged the city, reducing its people to weak, trembling shadows, Iset knew the time for hiding was over. The city was collapsing around them, and the truth, however dangerous, was Egypt's only hope. She had gathered it piece by agonizing piece. The irrefutable evidence of Thutmose's treachery, painstakingly collected by Nefertiti and Horemheb's loyal few, intertwined with her own validated cure for the plague. The scrolls, fragile papyrus bearing the weight of Egypt's future, were clutched tightly in her hands. She understood the immense risk. Thutmose, a cornered viper, would stop at nothing to silence her before she could speak. Yet a fierce resolve burned in her amber eyes. She had lost her love, her profession, her freedom, but she would not lose Egypt. Before the first rays of dawn kissed the golden spires of Thebes, Iset stepped out into the pre-dawn hush. The city was a ghost, its streets eerily quiet, save for the distant rumble of war drums. She was not alone. Horemheb's loyal soldiers, silent, formidable shadows, formed a protective cordon around her. Each step toward the looming palace was a step into the unknown, a journey toward either vindication or final destruction. She carried the truth, a dangerous double-edged sword, knowing it could save Egypt or seal her own doom. The weight of an empire, the fate of her love, and the desperate hope for healing rested on her slender shoulders as she walked toward the palace, ready to face the serpent in its lair. The rising sun, usually a symbol of new beginnings, now cast a long, ominous shadow, hinting at the desperate battle that awaited, a battle where truth and love were the ultimate stakes. The great hall of Pharaoh Amenhotep's palace, usually a bastion of immutable power, now trembled on the precipice of ruin. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of morning light that pierced the high windows, illuminating the weary faces of the few remaining advisors. Prince Thutmose, his voice dripping with feigned sorrow and calculated urgency, pleaded with his father. "Father, the Nubian hordes are at our very gates. Their numbers swell like the floodwaters of the Nile. Our defenses are breached, our granaries empty, our people weakened by this relentless plague. There is but one path to salvation, a grim one but necessary. We must surrender. Offer them tribute, offer them land, anything to spare Thebes from utter annihilation." His words were a serpent's hiss, coiling around the pharaoh's weary heart, seeking to crush his will and deliver Egypt into his treacherous hands. Amenhotep, haggard and aged beyond his years by the twin scourges of war and disease, gripped the arms of his throne, his eyes distant, defeat etched deeply into every line of his noble face. He was a lion whose roar had been stolen, a king brought to his knees by unseen forces. It was into this chamber of despair, this tableau of defeat, that Iset burst. The heavy bronze doors, usually guarded by impassive sentinels, swung open with a resounding clang. Her unexpected arrival ripping through the stifling silence. Her linen dress, once pristine, was now smudged with dust from the streets and the faint, enduring scent of the sick room. Her hair, usually meticulously braided, was loose around her face, framing eyes that blazed with an unyielding purpose. Behind her, Horemheb's loyal soldiers stood, their faces grim, their spears lowered in a silent declaration that none would bar her path. Thutmose, startled by the intrusion, whirled around, his face contorting from false piety to venomous rage. "By what authority do you dare profane these sacred halls, woman?" Thutmose snarled, his voice like grinding stone. "Have you come to gloat over the ruin you and your cursed general wrought?" Iset, ignoring him, advanced directly toward the throne, her gaze fixed on the Pharaoh. "My Pharaoh!" Her voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the thick air of despair. "I come with neither curses nor false counsel. I come with the truth, and with the salvation that has eluded your advisers." From the folds of her garments she produced the scrolls, parchments bearing her meticulous notes on the plague's progression and, more crucially, its remedy. She laid them before Amenhotep, then produced a sheaf of carefully bound letters, their edges crisp, their contents searing. "And I come with irrefutable proof of your true enemy, the serpent who coils in your own house," she declared, her eyes now locking onto Thutmose, a challenge as stark as the desert sun. The intercepted letters, painstakingly gathered by Nefertiti and Horemheb's loyal few over months of careful clandestine investigation, laid bare Thutmose's treachery. They detailed his secret pacts with the Nubian invaders, his insidious plot to starve Thebes with contaminated grain, and his orchestrating of Horemheb's exile and Iset's public disgrace. Each line was a stab to the heart of the kingdom. As a royal scribe, trembling, began to read aloud, Amenhotep's weary eyes widened in horror. The truth, long obscured by lies and fear, finally unveiled itself in the stark light of the Pharaoh's chamber. Thutmose's face, initially pale with shock, twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The game was up. With a guttural roar, he lunged, his hand instinctively gripping the ceremonial dagger at his belt, intending to silence Iset forever. But before the blade could even glint, the loyal guards, whose eyes had finally been opened to the prince's deceit, surged forward, their spears forming an impenetrable barrier. Thutmose, caught in the web of his own making, snarled like a cornered jackal, his betrayal undeniable, his power shattered. Just as the final damning words of Thutmose's treachery echoed through the hall, a messenger, breathless and covered in dust, burst into the chamber. "My Pharaoh, General Horemheb, has returned." The words, a thunderclap of hope, revitalized Amenhotep. Realization, stark and agonizing, washed over him. His terrible mistake, the banishment of his finest general, the condemnation of his most brilliant physician, had brought Egypt to the brink. Without a moment's hesitation, he commanded his fastest riders to recall Horemheb, though he knew it might already be too late. But it was not too late. As if summoned by the very desperation of Thebes, Horemheb appeared, riding through the city gates amidst the chaos of the encroaching Nubian army. He returned not with the full might of an army, but with a small, resolute band of loyal soldiers who had secretly joined him in his desert exile. Men forged in loyalty and tempered by hardship. Their faces were grim, their armor dust-caked, but their eyes blazed with an unyielding resolve. The reunion between Horemheb and Iset, though brief, was a desperate, passionate inferno against the backdrop of an empire on the verge of collapse. They met in the palace courtyard, the air thick with the dust of battle and the scent of impending doom. He dismounted, his gaze locking onto hers, the world around them fading into insignificance. There were no words, only a primal, urgent embrace, his strong arms closing around her as if to shield her from every sorrow the world could throw. Her hands flew to his face, tracing the lines of hardship, her fingers lingering on his lips, a silent promise. In that stolen moment amidst the chaos, their love was a blazing star, a defiant beacon against the encroaching darkness. Then, with a crushing reluctance, they pulled apart. The roar of the approaching Nubian army, a stark reminder of their grim duty. "Only moments, my love," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "before I must lead this city's defense." She nodded, her own heart aching with the brevity of their reunion, her eyes already scanning the horizon, preparing for her own part in the coming storm. The battle for Thebes erupted with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the ancient city. It was an epic symphony of clashing bronze, war cries, and desperate valor. Horemheb, restored to his full glory, led the military defense with a tactical brilliance sharpened by his exile. He moved like a desert wind, a whirlwind of steel and strategy, rallying the weary Egyptian forces, his presence alone, a surge of morale. Swords sang against shields, arrows rained down from the city walls, and the ground beneath them trembled with the thunder of thousands of feet. But the battle was not only fought with blades. In the heart of the city, amidst the makeshift fortifications, Iset moved with an equally fierce determination. She had transformed the palace's great reception halls into sprawling field hospitals, their gilded walls now echoing with the groans of the wounded. With her trusted servant Meret and a cadre of newfound assistants, Iset organized the desperate effort, saving wounded soldiers and civilians alike. She moved among the injured, her hands skilled and swift, applying her proven medical techniques, staunching blood, setting bones, and administering her powerful remedies against the plague. Their partnership, forged in adversity, proved crucial to Egypt's survival. The scene intercut between the furious sword fights on the battlements and the meticulous life-saving surgical procedures in the makeshift hospitals. A close-up of Horemheb's grim face as he parried a blow, then Iset's sweat-streaked brow as she carefully sutured a torn limb. His tactical brilliance on the battlefield, redirecting troops to exploit enemy weaknesses, was mirrored by her medical expertise, isolating the contaminated and treating the infected, preventing further spread. The loyal soldiers, witnessing their general's return, witnessing Iset's unwavering courage, fought with a renewed, almost supernatural vigor, knowing that their true leaders were back, fighting for them, fighting for Egypt. For Egypt! For Thebes! Their cries mingled with the clang of steel, a defiant roar against the tide of invasion. Just as victory seemed within their grasp, as the Nubian lines began to waver under the relentless assault of a renewed Egyptian spirit, Thutmose made his final, desperate gambit. Driven by a maddened fury, knowing his defeat was imminent, he somehow broke free from his guards, his eyes wild with malice. He surged into Iset's field hospital, a place of healing, and seized her, clamping a hand over her mouth, a dagger pressed to her throat. The sudden stillness in the chaotic battlefield was terrifying. "Horemheb!" Thutmose shrieked, his voice raw and filled with hatred. "Surrender, surrender, or watch your witch die!" The confrontation unfolded atop the grandest temple pyramid, a beacon against the fading light of the dying day. The battle raged below, a furious maelstrom of life and death, but all eyes, all hearts, were fixed on the agonizing tableau above. Horemheb froze, his warrior's heart torn asunder. The weight of his choice was unbearable. Save the woman he loved, the very essence of his soul, or save Egypt, the land he had sworn to protect. Iset, looking into Horemheb's anguished eyes, saw his torment. And in that moment she knew she could not allow him to choose. She was no mere pawn, no helpless victim. With a sudden, surprising twist, a move learned from years of precisely handling struggling patients, she broke free from Thutmose's grasp. Her medical knowledge, the intimate understanding of anatomy, muscles and pressure points, gave her an unexpected, almost shocking advantage in the fight. She moved with a furious grace, sidestepping his clumsy, enraged thrusts, anticipating his movements. She was as brave, as fierce as any warrior, fighting not with a sword, but with the sharp precision of a healer, the defiant spirit of a woman who had faced death too many times to fear it now. Their struggle was swift, brutal, and utterly personal, a desperate dance on the edge of the abyss. The Nubian invasion, its leadership shattered, its forces demoralized, finally crumbled and was repelled. The victory was hard won, bathed in the blood and sweat of heroes. Thutmose, defeated in his desperate struggle with Iset, met his end, his reign of deceit extinguished, and the plague, the insidious weapon that had nearly brought Egypt to its knees, was cured. Iset's formula of early treatment and diligent source isolation, once scoffed at, now became the cornerstone of a revitalized public health. Amenhotep, humbled by his near-fatal error, publicly acknowledged his mistakes, his voice thick with regret and profound gratitude. He proclaimed the heroism of both Iset and Horemheb, his words echoing across a liberated Thebes. The people who had witnessed their courage, suffered their sacrifice, and benefited directly from their skills, demanded more than just acknowledgement. Their love, once condemned, now became a legend, a testament to enduring hope. From the highest noble to the lowliest farmer, they celebrated the duo, their voices rising in a unified chorus, testifying to the integrity and unwavering service of the physician and the general. In an unprecedented ceremony, a moment that would be etched into the annals of Egyptian history, Pharaoh Amenhotep himself officiated the marriage of Iset and Horemheb. The grand temple of Karnak, usually reserved for the most sacred rites, became a tableau of joyous celebration. The air, once heavy with fear, now vibrated with song, laughter, and the heady scent of frankincense and lotus. Love which saves the kingdom deserves the blessing of gods and men, the pharaoh declared, his voice ringing with newfound wisdom, his eyes shining with profound pride. Iset, radiant in a gown of shimmering gold, moved with the grace of a goddess. The golden fabric, intricately woven, symbolized her dual role: the compassionate healer, the brilliant physician who had saved countless lives, and the revered general's wife, a woman whose courage had stood shoulder to shoulder with the greatest warriors. Horemheb, his spirit restored, his honor vindicated, was not only restored to his rank, but bestowed with new, unparalleled honors, a testament to his unwavering loyalty and boundless bravery. And Mythset, Iset's beloved mentor, freed from the unjust prison that had held him, his eyes brimming with tears of joy, stood proudly beside her, giving her away to the man who was both her equal and her destiny. The sun, setting over the resurrected city, cast long golden shadows, illuminating a future born of sacrifice, forged in love, and blessed by the very gods they had defied. This was the dawn of a new Egypt, one saved by a love so fierce, so true, that it shattered curses, vanquished armies, and brought light to the darkest hour. It was a love story that would echo through eternity, a timeless melody of courage, passion, and triumph. 5 years. 5 years had spun like the golden threads of a weaver's loom since the great battle for Thebes, since the curse of Thutmose was lifted, and the plague vanquished. The scars on the city remained, etched into the stones and in the memories of its people, but hope, vibrant and resilient, had taken root, blossoming in the shadow of the mighty pyramids. And at the heart of this renewed prosperity, this blossoming of an enlightened age, stood Iset and Horemheb, their love a living testament to the power that defied ancient curses and forged a new destiny for Egypt. Their bond, once forged in the crucible of crisis and tempered by fire, had not merely survived the passage of time, it had deepened, matured, transforming into an unbreakable union. The raw passion that had ignited between them still flickered, a warm, constant flame, but it was now interwoven with a profound tenderness, a quiet understanding that spoke volumes without a single word. Horemheb's eyes, still sharp with a warrior's perception, softened irrevocably whenever they rested upon Iset. And Iset, her spirit still fiercely independent, found solace and strength in his steadfast presence, the secure anchor in her boundless ambitions. Their home, once a sanctuary from the world's chaos, was now filled with the joyful cacophony of children. Two vibrant, curious souls, A boy with Horemheb's determined brow and Iset's amber eyes, and a girl with her father's strength and her mother's keen intellect, had blessed their union. They were a vivid reflection of the love that had defied all odds, a tangible legacy of a triumph born from sacrifice. The changes in Egyptian society, sparked by the dramatic events of those fateful days, were as profound as the shifting sands of the desert. Pharaoh Amenhotep, humbled and forever altered by his near-fatal misjudgment, had truly learned the lesson of his folly. His reign, once marked by weariness, now shone with a wisdom born of experience. He had embraced Iset's vision, supporting her revolutionary ideas with the full weight of his authority. And so, in the heart of Thebes, rising proudly beside the bustling markets and sacred temples, stood Egypt's first dedicated medical school. It was a place of learning unlike any other, where the ancient traditions of healing intertwined with Iset's groundbreaking methods. For the first time in Egypt's long history, the doors were flung wide open, allowing not just men, but also women to study alongside them, their minds eager to unravel the body's mysteries and serve their people. Iset, still the first physician, was its revered head, her tireless dedication inspiring generations. Horemheb, restored to his rank as general and now elevated to a position of unparalleled trust and influence, had rebuilt Egypt's military, fortifying its borders with an iron will, but also with a newfound appreciation for intelligence and diplomacy. He understood now that true strength lay not just in arms, but in foresight, integrity, and the well-being of his people. He often spoke of Iset's courage, attributing his own vindication to her unwavering belief in truth. His loyal soldiers, who had risked everything for their general and the woman he loved, now formed the bedrock of a new, honorable guard, their loyalty earned through the fires of adversity. Thutmose, Iset's wise mentor, lived out his twilight years surrounded by students and scrolls, his heart overflowing with pride as he watched his beloved pupil reshape the very future of Egyptian medicine. He had paid a price for his decision, suffering the injustice of imprisonment, but his wisdom had endured and his faith in Iset had been gloriously vindicated. Thutmose, of course, had paid the ultimate price for his ambition, his name a forgotten whisper in the winds, a stark reminder of the darkness that had been overcome. In the late afternoons, when the desert sun dipped low, casting long purple shadows across the fertile Nile, Iset and Horemheb could often be found within the courtyards of their burgeoning medical school. Their children, nimble and quick, often played amongst the students, their laughter a sweet melody. And there, amidst the eager faces of young physicians, the saviors of Thebes, as the people reverently called them, would teach side by side. Iset, her hands graceful and precise, demonstrating an intricate procedure, her voice calm and clear. Horemheb, standing beside her, his powerful presence a comforting reassurance, sharing anecdotes of how her methods had saved countless lives on the battlefield, stressing the unbreakable bond between healing and protection. Their love was not just a personal triumph. It was the bedrock upon which a more compassionate, more just society was being built, one lesson at a time, one life at a time. It was a powerful, undeniable truth, whispered from parent to child, sung in the streets by the bards. Their story became legend, proof that competence, integrity, and true love could indeed defy empires, shatter ancient beliefs, and change the world. In the land where pharaohs were worshipped as gods, two hearts proved that love was the most divine force of all. Their names were carved not just in stone, but in the very soul of Egypt, Iset and Horemheb, whose love defied an ancient world and created a new one. And so, our epic journey through ancient Egypt draws to a close, a testament not merely to the passage of time, but to the indomitable power of the human heart. Iset and Horemheb's story, born amidst the golden sands and the whispers of a pharaoh's curse, teaches us that even in the face of impossible odds, courage can rewrite destiny, integrity can defeat deceit, and love, true and unwavering, can transform not only two souls, but an entire civilization. Their tale reminds us that the greatest legacies are not carved in stone, but forged in the fires of conviction, in the quiet strength of unwavering belief, and in the profound choice to stand for what is right, no matter the cost. What did you feel as their story unfolded? Did you cheer for their triumphs, weep for their sacrifices, and believe in the magic of their unbreakable bond? We want to hear every thought, every emotion this sweeping saga stirred within you. In a world of such impossible choices, of duty clashing with desire, tell us, what would you have done in Iset's place? Or Horemheb's? Share your insights and join the conversation in the comments below. If this tale of enduring love, unwavering courage, and the timeless struggle for truth resonated with your soul, prove it. Type the word legacy in the comments. It's our secret sign that you stayed with us until the very end, a true believer in the power of a love that defied the gods themselves. Don't forget to share this epic romance with a friend and tag someone who truly loves a story where love conquers all. And if the whispers of ancient Egypt and the triumph of forbidden love ignited your spirit, then you won't want to miss our other captivating historical romances. Find them linked right here in the cards. Until next time, may your own heart be as brave and your love as enduring as that of Iset and Horemheb.